Just a week after Colorado and Deion Sanders were deemed irrelevant in college football, Deion Sanders is now the perfect replacement for Lincoln Riley at USC. What a world.
You are Locked On Buffs, your daily podcast on the Colorado Buffaloes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Buffs. I am your host, Kevin Borba. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sport stops sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We are also brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day for free and available wherever you get your podcasts. So thank you guys for tuning in, making me your first listen of the day. Like I said, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. My everydayers, you know who you are. You watch, you subscribe, you listen, you intake this podcast and this mug or this voice every single day. And I could not appreciate you more. Let's talk about it. Just last week, I'll give you guys context first before I dive in. Paul Finebaum went on First Take today and continued his weird rampage on USC, Lincoln Riley, and said that Lincoln Riley is going to get fired and that obviously if he was going to get fired, the perfect replacement for him. And it wasn't like Urban Meyer or it wasn't like, hey, we should try to draw Nick Saban out of retirement. No, it was Deion Sanders. And I think a lot of Colorado fans are like, I could see why he would want that or why USC would want that. I mean, imagine, and Paul talked about this today. Imagine Deion Sanders in Los Angeles, right? He's already booming in Boulder. Like he has boosted the Boulder economy. He has changed sort of Colorado in the way that no one ever expected that this program could be as popular as it is. And Colorado is one of the biggest stories in college football at all times. And that was never the case. And maybe back in the day when they were winning national titles in the 90s. But for the modern era, Colorado has never been as relevant as they are yet now, and they've never come close to it. Deion Sanders comes to town, brings that relevance. And so Paul says Lincoln Riley is going to get fired. He called him a disaster. And then he was like, let's go look at Deion Sanders for his replacement. I just got to tell you, one, I don't think the timing aligns for this. Now, if you were to say, hey, in 4 years, when Deion Sanders, sorry, I had a cough there. When Deion Sanders achieves what he needs to achieve at Colorado, maybe he moves on. His kids are no longer there, and he does move on for a bigger program. I had already highlighted the programs that I circled. USC was not one of them where I thought Deion Sanders could end up. Texas A&M was one to end up back in Texas. They hired Mike Elko. So that would have to go horribly, and I feel like Mike Elko is going to do a pretty darn good job. Miami and Florida. I don't know if Deion Sanders would be willing to go to a rival of his alma mater. So that was another one. Florida State, obviously Mike Norvell is not letting loose of that job anytime soon. So it's like, okay, where is the job that is a step up for Deion Sanders that will make him leave Colorado? Will be an offer he can't turn down. USC was one that I wasn't expecting. So if it were to come open and they were to go after him, that would be interesting. I'll be honest with you guys. But for Finebaum to say it's going to happen next year, I just think is totally blasphemy. You look at what USC's been through. They had Steve Sarkisian in, what was that, 2024? They had Steve in 2014 after they fired Lane Kiffin. Then they brought in Ed Orgeron and then Clay Helton for a game. Obviously, Steve was at the helm. The next year, they went 9-4. The following year, they went 3-2 under Steve before he was unfortunately let go for personal issues. And then they brought in Clay Helton, who coached the last 9 games. And then he coached from 2016 all the way till 2021 when he was fired. So you had Clay Helton as the main head coach. So not his first year, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021. Clay Helton got 6 years. His best record came in his second year when they went 11-3, and USC still get, unless you count the COVID year, they went 5-1. But I mean, we can't count the COVID year. So Clay Helton got 6 years. His best year was 11-3. They lost in the Cotton Bowl, and they just they never really achieved much under him. They realized, okay, this guy cannot get us to the level that we need to be at to contend. So they go out and bring in Lincoln Riley, who signed the largest contract in college football history at that time, worth 110 million. It was like He gets a private jet. He has a mansion in somewhere in Los Angeles. He's living the good life. And so now, all of a sudden, Lincoln Riley's going to be fired after 3 years, one of which, like, he went 11-3 his first year, which that was Clay Helton's best year, 11-3. And so Lincoln Riley goes 11-3 his first year, has a terrible year last year in the sense of USC was supposed to take that next step. They had Caleb Williams, the number 1 pick, and they go 8-5. And a lot of people blamed his defensive coordinator, which he did fire him. And I think that was a move that he made about 2 or 3 years too late. Probably could have fired him at Oklahoma. But he brought him with him and tried it out, and it didn't work out. So now he has a new defense coordinator. And so if you're Paul Finebaum and you're telling me, one, Lincoln Riley is going to struggle so much again that he gets fired after 3 years, despite being like USC would be on the hook for having to pay so much money. And what coach is going to give up all that money to? No, not going to happen. So that doesn't make sense. And then also, I think this is a bit of a little hypocrisy because you look at what Paul Finebaum said just last week about Deion Sanders. And this is, and I quote, this was at the SEC media days. Anyone asking whether Deion Sanders and Colorado are close to the playoffs simply don't understand the reality of the road. They're not going to the playoffs this year, and I'm not sure Deion Sanders is ever going to get them to the playoffs because I don't think he has the patience to stay at Colorado long enough. Said there are so many misconceptions out there. Deion Sanders is the best salesman I've ever seen. I personally love the guy for what he stands for, but the program looking out has a ridiculous inflated view of itself. I heard Shador, who is a fabulous quarterback, say, "We are everyone's Super Bowl. Shador, you are not. You are easy win nowadays. You got off to a phenomenal start last year, beating a couple of mediocre teams that had big names. And quite frankly, you haven't done anything since then crash and burn." And he said, "I know the media loves the story. We fall all over ourselves, but college isn't important in college football. Deion Sanders is. He's a standalone person. He's the most charismatic people, one of the most charismatic people we've ever seen. But Colorado is nothing. They do not matter. They're irrelevant in the big picture." So you mean to tell me that on one hand, you think Colorado is irrelevant and Deion Sanders is always going to be relevant, which I agree with that part, but Colorado as a program is irrelevant, but Deion Sanders is going to basically fail his way into a blue blood job? That's what you're telling me, Paul. That Deion Sanders is going to take a program, be mediocre, be irrelevant in college football, and USC is going to fire the highest paid coach in college football and bring in someone who, and this is off Paul's logic, hasn't proven that he could win at the Power 5 level. That's what you're telling me. Could not disagree more, but this is what this is what Paul had to say about Deion Sanders today being the perfect replacement for Lincoln Riley, which I think, and this isn't me calling Paul biased, but I do think that there is a sense of Paul doesn't love Lincoln Riley. I think a lot of what Lincoln Riley has done rubbed Paul the wrong way. I think him not being able to get over the hump at Oklahoma was something that rubbed him the wrong way. I think him not firing Alex Grinch sooner rubbed him the wrong way. I think Lincoln Riley actively avoiding the SEC for whatever reason rubbed Paul the wrong way, because Paul does not hold back on Lincoln Riley. He said he was a disaster, said he should have been fired after last year. And it's like, okay, you're going to fire him after 2 years. Like, you just have to use logic sometimes. And that logic doesn't make sense to me. But nonetheless, I digress. This is what he said today about Deion Sanders. Stephen A. and he's Stephen A. Smith. I get where you're coming from. To me, it's about trajectory. And I think he's lost the momentum. Talking about Lincoln Riley. He had the town. You lived there a lot of the year. Talking about Stephen A. You have to, otherwise you lose badly, and I think he's losing badly. Instead of harping on Lincoln Riley, I've decided to come up with a solution. I thought, okay, maybe he does well, maybe he doesn't. The answer is really moving forward, and I believe that the answer after this season is Deion Sanders. He's going to be tired of Colorado because, quite frankly, it's not prime time. He's done well as he can with his son and Travis Hunter and all the Stephen A's and Shannon Sharp appearances. That's going to dry up this year because they're not going to be that great. But you put prime in Tinseltown, which I don't even know what that means, because I thought Tinseltown was like, isn't that Christmas? Isn't Tinseltown a Christmas related thing? As a California native, I've never heard LA referred to as Tinseltown. I have no idea what that means. But he says, and I think you have one of the greatest combinations in history. We have just got through talking, or you just talked about LeBron has owned that town as many others did before him. I think Deion Sanders as a coach at Southern Cal is the answer to the problems. Lincoln Riley is a good coach. He's got a great resume. Deion Sanders exudes exactly what the community is all about. He takes the recruiting there where Lincoln had, and then lost it. But I think he sustains it, especially now. So, and he also went on to say that Deion Sanders would be the biggest story in the Big Ten, which I mean, that's true because Deion Sanders is the biggest story wherever he goes. But I just don't get how it could be both worlds. How can it be Deion Sanders and Colorado are going to be bad, but Deion Sanders is going to parlay that into the USC job? I think this is a prime example of something that Paul Finebaum said he wanted other media members to stop doing. He just did himself. And I don't think USC next year will be the move for Deion Sanders. And I don't think USC is moving on from Lincoln Riley after 3 years, after they just gave Clay Helton 5 or 6 or whatever the number was. So really odd take. I don't think there's any sort of ground to Deion Sanders to USC. That's really random. I just don't foresee that happening. Come back to me in a year and let's talk about it. I don't think that's something that we in the college football world and Colorado fans should ever be worried about. I think that was just a big name thrown out because I think there's some personal stuff there. But that's just my opinion, I guess, because I don't think Deion Sanders is going to USC anytime soon. When we come back, we're going to be talking about Colorado's identity crisis last year and will it affect them this year. This episode of Locked On Buffs is brought to you by our sponsors over at FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games and the sports aren't sporting like I want them to. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel is the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Welcome back to Locked On Buffs. I appreciate you guys for tuning in every single day, making me your first listen of the day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, so make sure to like, subscribe, follow my everydayers. You know who you are. I appreciate you. Keep tuning in. Keep sharing this. Let's keep growing this community, and let's have some fun. Colorado's identity problem. It was a bad one. There was multiple times last year where Colorado head coach Deion Sanders was talking about trying to find Colorado's identity. And I don't know if they've established it already. I think obviously they have an idea about it, but realistically, they haven't played any games yet. So how can you really know what their identity is in a year that they have so many new pieces? But I think it's just one of those things where you look at Colorado, and this was, he said after the USC loss, I don't know who we are. Okay, that's interesting. That was 4 weeks into the season. I think he also said it later in the season after the UCLA game, where it's one of those. I think it was after the UCLA game where it was like, okay, we don't have an identity. I don't really know what this team is. Like, we don't know who we are. And it's one of those things where it's like, okay, you were midway through the season at that point. I think Stanford, there's some identity talks as well. It's like, where do we determine this identity? And I think it starts in the offseason. I think Deion Sanders and his staff kind of learned that, or should have learned that. And I think if I had to project what their offensive line, their identity was going to be this year, I think it's a team that's much more physical. I think they brought in a lot of transfers in the trenches that are sort of setting them up to be a physical team. I think physicality is at the forefront. I do think that they're going to still be a high octane offense and defense that's made off of big plays and sort of these loud, like, deep bombs on offense and big interceptions on defense. But Colorado needs to have a sense of self, because if they go on a losing streak again this year and we hear Deion Sanders say, we don't have an identity, I don't really know how you fix that. Like, I don't know how you find an identity after not having one for 2 years in a row. Like, I think at that point, that's just a reflection of where the program's at. And so I think Deion Sanders' priority number one this year, let me just put it this way. Priorities for Deion Sanders in Colorado. I don't know what order I'd put him in. 1, trenches need to be better. Absolutely. 2, game management. It was atrocious last year. They had a lot of game management issues. USC was one game. Oregon State was another. Obviously, Stanford, that was a horribly mismanaged game. And then 3, what is your identity? When you think of this Colorado team, you think of what? Like, not the transfer portal, not like Shedeur Sanders, not Travis Hunter. You think of what? They're good at what? This team predicates himself on what to win games. And if you were to ask someone from Colorado right now, what do you think they would say? Because I do think that they've emphasized it a lot this summer. I think they need to be mentally tougher. I think that's also going to be what part of what forms their identity. So this Colorado team has a lot of questions to sort of address, but I do think their identity should be easier to find because, or at least not find, but at least develop, cultivate, if you will. Because I think last year, what went wrong was, one, they succeeded so quickly that their identity was just like, hey, we're this underdog where it's like we're defying the odds. And then they got a bunch of hype and like they went from underdogs to like favorites. And like people are going to be like, they didn't really go from underdogs to favorites. They did. Like people were talking about them contending for the Pac-12. There was playoff comparisons or playoff talks. There was comparisons to them, comparisons with them to the LSU team that won the title, Joe Burrow. Like everyone just gassed them up so quickly. And it was like, okay, were they just sort of vibing off of the energy that everyone else was giving them, or were they sort of predicating themselves on something? And I don't think they were. And so then when times got tough, they didn't have anything that they could look back on and be like, okay, guys, I know we've lost 3 straight at this point, but we are a blank team. This is what we do. We are good at blank. So we have to do that. They didn't have that. Like there was problems all over the place. So I think if Colorado is going to sort of fix their issues from last season, which there was a lot of them, outside of like getting a better offensive line, which they have, learning from their time management mistakes, they have to find an identity. You guys comment below, what do you think their identity should be in 2024? Because I feel like there's a lot of possibilities out there on how this team should be sort of managed, if you will. When we come back, we are going to be talking about the latest on college football expansion. Is the Big 12 due for some new members or not? Welcome back to Locked On Buffs. I appreciate you guys for tuning in every single day, making me your first listen of the day. Free and available wherever you get your podcast. I want to thank all of you for tuning in, for liking, for subscribing, all of that, because I could not have done it without you. You guys offer me all the support in the world, and I love you guys for it. Let's talk about the news from ACC country. So the past few weeks or so have been flooded with conference realignment rumors. It was reported by someone at 24/7 Sports that Arizona State's already in the Big 12. Florida State, Clemson, Big 12 bound in the next year or so. And then everyone's like, oh, shoot, they want to go to the SEC or the Big 10. The SEC was like, no, we're fine at 16. And the Big 10 was like, we don't want Florida State. They bring in too much drama. And then it was like, okay, so they have to go to the Big 12. And then there was some news where it's like, well, when they go to the Big 12, they're going to want special treatment. They're going to want that Texas-Oklahoma treatment where they get a little bit more than everyone else. And I don't think the Big 12, no program's going to be like, yeah, we want these new people who haven't been in our conference. We want them to run this conference already. Just give them all the power. No one wants that. Well, today at ACC Media Days, the first day, Commissioner Jim Phillips goes, yeah, we are going to fight this. Like, we are going to fight these legal battles as long as we have to, because Clemson and Florida State are both figuring out ways to get the hell out of the conference, because when I saw reported initially, it was over $500 million for Florida State to leave. And they're supposed to let them know, the ACC, by August, I think, 15th, that they plan to leave the conference, and they haven't done that. And according to Dennis Dodd at CBS Sports, they're not going to do that. So the Big 12, if they do want to add Florida State and Clemson, I think they're going to have to wait a couple of years, if not longer. The way Dennis Dodd made it sound, someone he talked to basically said, we're thinking of, and it was a Florida State person, they were thinking of Florida State in the next 5 years, the next 10 years. So we might be a ways away from conference realignment sort of kicking off. But I think if you're the Big 12, you kind of have to be happy with where you're at. I think you do just need to sort of ensure that you take all the measures possible to sort of be in position to add Florida State and Clemson, because you don't want to lose out on 2 major brands. Because I talked about this last week. What do they bring to the Big 12? Obviously, they bring championships. They've won 3 titles since, I think, 2013. Jameis Winston led Florida State to 1, and then Clemson won 2 recently. one with Deshaun Watson at quarterback, and then one with Trevor Lawrence at quarterback, and they're somewhat of a dynasty. It was Alabama Clemson type vibes out there in the college football realm. So you would get a face of the conference. We talk about this all the time. Who's going to be the face of the Big 12? And I think the Big 12 is so competitive that realistically there could be multiple faces any given year. Like it's like, oh, Colorado was really good this year, so they're the face. And then it's like, oh, Utah is the face this year because they did this and this and this. And so I think those two would provide major brands that would sort of establish themselves as the face of the conference. But also think about it like this. You get those two, then maybe you get a Miami, maybe you get a North Carolina, and all of a sudden you're kind of cooking. You know, the Big 12 is no longer viewed as that little brother conference to the SEC and the Big 10. I'm not saying they'd replace them or be at that level, but they're not going to be far behind. And so I think the Big 12 should still try to push for them, but I do think they have to go about it carefully. You don't want to lose money. You don't want to frustrate other conference members. And you just have to make sure that it happens at the right time. Otherwise, this whole move won't be worth it. Thank you guys for tuning in to Locked On Buffs today. I appreciate you for liking, subscribing, following, all that jazz. I appreciate all the support that you guys give me. My everydayers, you know who you are. Comment below. I will see you guys tomorrow. Everyone have a great start to your week.